Hello, my name's Peter from Wiltshire Mobile Libraries. Thank you for joining me for this tea and chat session. In these sessions, myself and colleagues from Wiltshire Libraries share poems and read extracts of writing that we hope will be engaging and maybe even thought-provoking. If you'd like to get in touch, please do post a comment. I've got my beverage here, which today is indeed a mug of standard English tea. Milk no sugar if you ever make me a refill. I hope you have a preferred drink to hand and maybe a biscuit. These things shouldn't be ignored. The theme for this tea and chat today is water in all its various forms of streams, pools, rivers, and the sea. I thought this would be a good theme to match what's been a bit of a turbulent summer so far, with hot days for riverside walks and seaside staycations, but also thunderous downpours and rain. Before I read my first chosen poem, I thought I'd start with a book recommendation. The book I'd like to recommend is Waterlog by A Swimmer's Journey Through Britain, and it's by the British writer and environmentalist Roger Deacon. The blurb on the back is also a great introduction to today's water theme. It's inspired by John Cheever's short story The Swimmer, which was the one that was made into the film with Burt Lancaster, where he swims home through the swimming pools in the back gardens of his neighbours. Roger Deacon set out to swim through the British Isles. The result is Waterlog, a uniquely personal view of an island race and a people with a deep affinity for water. From the sea, from rock pools, from rivers and streams, tarns, lakes, lochs, ponds, lidos, swimming pools and spas, from fens, dikes, moats, aqueducts, waterfalls, flooded quarries, even canals, Deacon gains a fascinating perspective on modern Britain. Encompassing cultural history, autobiography, travel writing, and natural history, Waterlog is a personal journey, a bold assertion of the native swimmer's right to roam, and an unforgettable celebration of the magic of water. So that is Waterlog by Roger Deacon, available from Wiltshire Libraries. A really good book. Even if you don't enjoy wild swimming, it's a fascinating example of looking at water and particularly Britain's relationship to water. So the first poem I'd like to read is an extract from Beowulf, one of the first poems known to have been written in English over 1,000 years ago. I'm reading it in translation, as my Old English is a bit rusty, but in this bit, the hero Beowulf, who is the leader of a tribe called the Yeats from Sweden, decides to sail over from Sweden to help out a Danish king who's in trouble. He ordered a boat that would ply the waves. He announced his plan to sail the Swan's Road and search out that king, the famous prince who needed defenders. I love that metaphor for the sea, the Swan's Road. The warrior boarded the boat as captain, a canny pilot along coast and currents. Time went by, the boat was on water, in close under the cliffs. Men climbed eagerly up the gangplank, sand churned in surf. Warriors loaded a cargo of weapons, shining war gear in the vessel's hold, then heaved out, away with a will in their wood-wreathed ship. Over the waves, with the wind behind her and foam at her neck, she flew like a bird, until her curved prow had covered the distance, and on the following day, at the due hour, those seafarers sighted land, sunlit cliffs, sheer crags, and looming headlands, the landfall they sought. It was the end of their voyage, and the Geats vaulted over the side, out onto the sand, and moored their ship. There was a clash of mail and a thresh of gear. They thanked God for that easy crossing on a calm sea. I do like the fact that even 1,000 years ago, with people who were very much like the Vikings and used to sailing on the seas, or the Swan's Road as it's called here, still have a great feeling of relief at the end when they thank God for that easy crossing on a calm sea. I think that's something that we can all relate to, even if we're experienced sailors who like going out on rough seas. There's always a sense of relief when it's a calm crossing. So, next I'd like to read the beginning of the poem Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. This is a classic poem, which many of you may know. particularly if you ever listen to Poetry Please with Roger McGough on Radio 4. I'm just going to read the start section of it because of its relationship to water, particularly the sea in this case. The sea is calm tonight, the tide is full, the moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand, glimmering and vast, out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window, sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land. Listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand. Begin and cease, and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Water, especially rivers, lakes, and the sea, can be mysterious as you don't know what's under the surface. And writing about water seems to often be used as a metaphor for the mysterious and sometimes frightening world of the unknown. Listen to this extract from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, in which a man called Marlowe travels deep into the Congo on a riverboat looking for someone called Kurtz. Going up that river was like travelling back to the earliest beginnings of the world, when vegetation rioted on the earth and the big trees were kings. An empty stream, a great silence, an impenetrable forest. The air was warm, thick, heavy, sluggish. There was no joy in the brilliance of sunshine. The long stretches of the waterway ran on, deserted, into the gloom of overshadowed distances. On silvery sandbanks, hippos and alligators sunned themselves side by side. The broadening waters flowed through a mob of wooded islands. You lost your way on that river as you would in a desert, and butted all day long against the shoals, trying to find the channel, till you thought yourself bewitched and cut off forever from everything you had ever known, somewhere far away in another existence perhaps. There were moments when one's past came back to one, as it will sometimes when you have not a moment to spare to yourself. But it came in the shape of an unrestful and noisy dream, remembered with wonder amongst the overwhelming realities of this strange world of plants and water and silence. And this stillness of life did not in the least resemble a peace. It was the stillness of an implacable force brooding over an inscrutable intention. It looked at you with a vengeful aspect. I got used to it afterwards. I did not see it any more. I had no time. I had to keep guessing at the channel. I had to discern, mostly by inspiration, the signs of hidden banks. I watched for sunken stones. I was learning to clap my teeth smartly before my heart flew out when I shaved by a fluke some infernal sly old snag that would have ripped the life out of the tin pot steamboat and drowned all the pilgrims. I had to keep a lookout for the signs of dead wood we could cut up in the night for the next day's steaming. When you have to attend to things of that sort, to the mere incidents of surface, the reality, I tell you, fades. The inner truth is hidden, luckily. But I felt it all the same. I felt often its mysterious stillness watching me at my monkey tricks, just as it watches everyone. And on we went again into the silence, along empty reaches, round the still bends, between the high walls of our winding way, reverberating in hollow claps the ponderous beat of the stern wheel. Trees, millions of trees, massive, immense, running up high, and at their foot, hugging the bank against the stream, crept the little begrimed steamboat, like a sluggish beetle crawling on the floor of a lofty portico. It made you feel very small, very lost, and yet it was not altogether depressing, that feeling. After all, if you were small, the grimy beetle crawled on, which was just what you wanted it to do. Where the pilgrims imagined it crawled to, I don't know. To some place where they expected to get something, I bet. For me, it crawled towards Kurtz, exclusively. But when the steam pipes started leaking, we crawled very slowly. The reaches opened before us and closed behind, as if the forest had stepped leisurely across the water to bar the way for our return. We penetrated deeper and deeper into the heart of darkness. It was very quiet there. That's from an extract from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So you can see there that water can be almost a sort of symbol of threat, because we don't know what's under the surface, and there can be dangers lurking there. It can also seem to have a feeling of melancholy in many writers when they write about water. However, sometimes water is seen as something more pure, such as a much needed cool drink on a hot summer's day. This is the beginning of a favourite poem of mine, Snake by D.H. Lawrence. And it was written by the author while he was living in Sicily and went to get a drink of water from a fountain, only to find that someone had got there before him. A snake came to my water trough on a hot, hot day, and I in pyjamas for the heat to drink there. In the deep, strange, scented shade of the great dark carob tree, I came down the steps with my pitcher, and must stand and wait, for there he was at the trough before me. He reached down from a fissure in the earth wall in the gloom, and trailed his yellow-brown slackness soft-bellied down over the edge of the stone trough, and rested his throat upon the stone bottom. And where the water had dripped from the tap in a small clearness, he sipped with his straight mouth, softly drank through his straight gums into his slack, long body, silently. Someone was before me at my water trough, and I like a second comer waiting. He lifted his head from his drinking, as cattle do, and looked at me vaguely as drinking cattle do, and flicked his two-forked tongue from his lips and mused a moment, and stooped and drank a little more, being earth-brown, earth-golden, from the burning bowels of the earth, on the day of Sicilian July, with Etna smoking. I'm not going to read the whole poem. Regular participants in our tea and chats may recall hearing Steph at Melksham Library read the whole of that poem this time last year. But like I say, it's one of my favourites, and I thought it bears repeating on this occasion. I particularly like the section where he's describing the snake reaching down to take its first drink. And he puts lots of sort of noises, hissing noises, that almost conjure up the noise that the snake might make. He reached down from the fissure in the earth wall in the gloom, and trailed his yellow-brown slackness soft-bellied down over the edge of the stone trough. And then he sipped with his straight mouth, softly drank through his straight gums into his slack, long body, silently. I'm very sure that that is deliberate on D.H. Lawrence's part to invoke the spirit of the snake. I also love the description at the end of the snake itself and the colours of the snake. I imagine possibly an adder, if you've ever seen one of those with their gold eyes, where he says it's earth brown, earth golden, from the burning bowels of the earth. Just an amazing poem, I think. I think D.H. Lawrence, the author, is very underrated as a poet. Lots of people know his books, but not so many people know his poems. So I'd like to make a programme recommendation now, after those bits of writing. On Sunday, I was watching Chris Packham do a programme on BBC Two called Chris Packham, The Walk That Made Me. It's still available on BBC iPlayer, and it's one of the BBC's occasional excellent series of walks programmes where people film themselves on a walk in the countryside with one of those sort of cameras on a stick, reflecting on things and usually recommending some poems. Chris Packham's walk's very much connected to water in this programme, as he follows a path by the River Itchen in Hampshire towards Winchester Cathedral. He encounters a wild swimmer at a weir and some local enthusiasts nearby opening the sluices to an ancient water meadow system. At which point in the programme, if you haven't seen it, Chris Packham can't help reverting to his wildlife cameraman training and gets the wild swimmer to use a GoPro camera to film underwater footage of the water rushing through the sluice. Looks amazing. He talks about the importance of walking and engaging with nature in helping his own mental well-being, and reads some poems with a personal meaning to him, including The Windhover by Gerard Manley Hopkins, which my colleague Basil read last month in his tea and chat session from the 6th of July, which, by the way, is still available on Wiltshire Library's YouTube channel for you to watch again. So, I'd like to read a little bit from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. It is a story which I always enjoyed from my youth, and it has some great bits about adventures on the Mississippi River. And this is a section in which Tom, his friend Joe, and his friend Huckleberry Finn are pretending to be pirates, having decided that they're going to run away from their homes because they feel they've been treated very unfairly by their parents. 3 miles below St. Petersburg, at a point where the Mississippi River was a trifle over a mile wide, there was a long, narrow, wooded island with a shallow bar at the head of it, and this offered well as a rendezvous. It was not inhabited. It lay far over towards the farthest shore, abreast a dense and almost wholly unpeopled forest. So Jackson's Island was chosen. Who were to be the subjects of their piracies was a matter that did not occur to them. Then they hunted up Huckleberry Finn, and he joined them promptly. For all careers were one to him, he was indifferent. They presently separated to meet at a lonely spot on the riverbank, 2 miles above the village, at the favourite hour, which was, of course, midnight. There was a small log raft there which they meant to capture. Each would bring hooks and lines and such provisions as he could steal in the most dark and mysterious way, as becomes outlaws. And before the afternoon was done, they had all managed to enjoy the sweet glory of spreading the fact that pretty soon the town would hear something, and all who got this vague hint were cautioned to be mum and wait. About midnight, Tom arrived with a boiled ham and a few trifles, and stopped in a dense undergrowth on the small bluff overlooking the meeting place. It was starlight and very still. The mighty river lay like an ocean at rest. Tom listened a moment, but no sound disturbed the quiet. Then he gave a low, distinct whistle. It was answered from under the bluff. Tom whistled twice more. These signals were answered in the same way. Then a guarded voice said, "Who goes there?" "Tom Sawyer, the Black Avenger of the Spanish Main. Name your names." "Huck Finn, the Red-Handed, and Joe Harper, the Terror of the Seas." Tom had furnished these titles from his favourite literature. "'Tis well, give the countersign." 2 hoarse whispers delivered the same awful word simultaneously to the brooding night. "Blood." Then Tom tumbled his ham over the bluff and let himself down over it, tearing both skin and clothes to some extent in the effort. There was an easy, comfortable path along the shore under the bluff, but it lacked the advantages of difficulty and danger so valued by a pirate. The Terror of the Seas had brought a side of bacon, and had about worn himself out with getting it there. Finn the Red-Handed had stolen a skillet and a quantity of half-cured leaf tobacco, and had also brought a few corn cobs to make pipes with, but none of the pirates smoked or chewed but himself. They shoved off presently, Tom in command, Huck at the after oar, and Joe at the forward. Tom stood amidships, gloomy-browed and with folded arms, and gave his orders in a low, stern whisper. "Luff and bring her to the wind." "Aye, aye, sir." "Steady, steady." "Steady it is, sir." As the boys steadily and monotonously drove the raft towards midstream, it was no doubt understood that these orders were given only for style, were not intended to mean anything in particular. The raft drew beyond the middle of the river. The boys pointed her head right, and then lay on their oars. The river was not high, so there was not more than a 2 or 3 mile current. Hardly a word was said during the next 3/4 of an hour. Now the raft was passing before the distant town. 2 or 3 glimmering lights showed where it lay, peacefully sleeping, beyond the vast, vague sweep of star-gemmed water, unconscious of the tremulous event that was happening. The Black Avenger stood still with folded arms, looking his last upon the scene of his former joys and his later sufferings, and wishing she could see him now, abroad on the wild sea, facing peril with death, with dauntless heart, going to his doom with a grim smile on his lips. It was but a small strain on his imagination to remove Jackson's Island beyond eyeshot of the village, and so he looked his last with a broken and satisfied heart. The other pirates were looking their last too, and they all looked so long that they came near letting the current drift them out of range of the island. But they discovered the danger in time and made shift to avert it. About 2 o'clock in the morning, the raft grounded on the bar 200 yards above the head of the island, and they waded back and forth until they had landed their freight. Part of the little raft's belongings consisted of an old sail, and this they spread over a nook in the bushes for a tent to shelter their provisions, but they themselves would sleep in the open air in good weather, as became outlaws. That was an extract from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. And finally, I would like to end as I began, with a final bit of poetry about water. This is the first part of a poem called Coole Park and Ballylee by W.B. Yeats. It has some great water imagery, as well as a description of someone whose mood is changed and lifted by an encounter with nature, just like Chris Packham finds that he is when he goes on his walk. So this is Coole Park and Ballylee by W.B. Yeats. Under my window ledge the waters race, otters below and moorhens on the top, run for a mile undimmed in heaven's face. Then darkening through dark, raftery cellar drop, run underground, rise in a rocky place. In cool domain and there to finish up, spread to a lake and drop into a hole. What's water but the generated soul? Upon the border of that lake's a wood, now all dry sticks under a wintry sun, and in a copse of beeches there I stood, for nature's pulled her tragic buskin on, and all the rants a mirror of my mood. At sudden thunder of the mounting swan I turned about and looked where branches break the glittering reaches of the flooded lake. Another emblem there, that stormy white, but seems a concentration of the sky, and like the soul it sails into the sight, and in the morning's gone, no man knows why, and is so lovely that it sets to right what knowledge or its lack had set awry. I really like that imagery of the man who's wandering by the side of the lake, feeling a bit bleak perhaps, when suddenly the beautiful sight of the swans taking off into the air in front of him shakes him out of his mood and fills him with wonder. And I really love that last line, that no man knows why, and the sight is so lovely that it sets to right what knowledge or its lack had set awry. So that's Coole Park and Ballylee by W.B. Yeats. So, one last thing that I would like to do before we end today's session is give you a final book recommendation. I don't have a copy to hand up, but put in front of you, but it's Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, which is a vintage comic novel, for those of you that don't know it, in which three friends decide to go on a fairly disastrous rowing holiday on the River Thames. The language is quite old-fashioned, as it was published over a century ago, but it's a short book, and if you stick with the characters, it's got a humour that builds and can still make people snort with laughter. Well, me anyway. That's Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, which is also available through Wiltshire Libraries. I'll put a list of all the poems, books, and the programme I recommended during this tea and chat session on the Wiltshire Mobiles Libraries Facebook page later. The next tea and chat session will be in 2 weeks' time on Tuesday the 17th of August at the same time of 3 p.m. with Steph on the Melksham Library Facebook page. But for now, it's time for me to say goodbye and thanks for listening.